Welcome to The Real News. I'm Eddie Conway, coming to you from Baltimore. Recently, Attorney General Jeff Sessions has rescinded an order that President Obama gave 6 months ago to end the Department of Justice use of private prisons. Sessions claims that there's going to be a continuing rise in crime and these private prisons are needed. Here to kind of like unwrap this and explain it to us is Glen Ford. Glen Ford is the executive editor of the Black Agenda Report and also the author of The Big Lie. Thanks for joining me, Glen.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Okay, tell us what this new order is that Sessions just put out.
Well, actually, we don't know for sure, and it's subject to great interpretation because it was a very terse order, and he didn't explain what the Trump administration anticipated. He simply said that phasing out the private prisons, which house about 1 out of every 6 federal inmates, there are 190,000 federal inmates in the system, that phasing that out would hurt the system's ability to meet, in his words, future needs. And that's the scary terminology. Why does the Trump administration anticipate that it's going to need more room to put more prisoners in prison when actually the federal prison population has been shrinking? And right now it's at the lowest population level in 10 years. And the Obama administration had anticipated that the decline in federal incarceration would continue, so that those 1 out of 6 inmates who had been contracted out, farmed out to these private prisons, that group could be reduced to 0. So the question is, what does Attorney General Sessions know that the rest of us don't know in terms of what's going to happen in the U.S. prisons? Now, we do know, it is clear that President Trump, his ambition is to outdo former President Barack Obama as the deporter-in-chief. But locking up immigrants is not the job of the Bureau of Prisons. That comes under immigrations and customs and other parts of Homeland Security. And immigration and customs, even before the November elections, they were already expanding their detention facilities. This is before Trump was elected. They were expanding their facilities and using private prisons to do so. But again, that's outside of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. So Sessions could not have been talking about the need to expand the Federal Bureau because of immigrants. Lots of people anticipate, or speculate rather, that this was simply something that the administration was doing in order to help the 2 corporations that dominate this whole private prison business. There are just 2 of them. One's called the Geo Group. The other one is called Core Civic. It used to be named the Corrections Corporation of America. And when the Obama administration made its announcement that it was phasing out the private contracting out of prison cells in the federal system, the stock on the stock exchange of those 2 companies went way down. But then with the November election of Donald Trump, the stock went way up. And presumably with last week's announcement by the Attorney General, the price of these 2 corporation stock will continue to be high. But that still doesn't answer the question, because in order to justify these contracts, the federal prison system still has to fill beds with prisoners. And there is no sign of any crime wave on the horizon. But we have to also understand that crime is whatever cops say it is. And if we look at the immigration scene again, immigration agents are getting what they describe as unfettered discretion from this Trump administration to stop and detain people under whatever circumstances they see fit. And of course, that's going to lead over time to huge numbers of people being detained, and lots of them in private detention. And if federal cops and other cops all over the country can be given that same kind of unfettered discretion, then we'll see a similar increase in arrests and detentions in the criminal scene as well, even if there is no actual rise in crime. Because again, crime is what the cops say it is.
Yes, well, let me see if I really understand this now. I heard you say that ICE and Homeland Security have their own set of prisons for the people, the immigrants that they're rounding up. So you're saying these prisons that Session is trying to bring back online is for actual criminals and not for the detention people?
That's what it appears to be. That's what the Federal Bureau of Prisons oversees. And Homeland Security has a different situation. And as I said, Homeland Security was increasing their use of private prisons, even under President Barack Obama. His order did not extend to them.
Okay, so this actually concerns me now, because one of the things that research show is that these private prisons are the worst offenders of human rights and the worst abusers of people held in their custody. And I thought that was part of the reason why the Department of Justice wanted to move away from them, because people were being killed, people were suffering from lack of medical attention. So if they're that bad and the overall prison population, federal prison population is shrinking, what's happening here? I mean, that's a concern. You're saying they're just going to start creating criminal elements and just tossing people in jail?
I'm saying that Attorney General Sessions and Donald Trump come from a tradition of punitive imprisonment. That is, not just imprisoning people to take them away from society, certainly not imprisoning people to rehabilitate them, but imprisoning people to treat them as badly as possible. And with that kind of world view, they're not fazed at all that private prisons have been documented to be the worst of the worst. I have to say, however, that the Barack Obama administration didn't drop private prisons because they were so bad. Everybody has known that they were so bad for a very long time. They dropped them because of the public demands that among many other reform demands, that private prisons be outlawed.
Well, you know, this, okay, I hear you. This concerns me, though, because a look back in history reminds me of something similar that happened in Nazi Germany, where they were illegally putting in prisons certain categories of people that they no longer deemed as valuable. Is this like another parallel to that kind of history?
Well, since we have Attorney General Sessions, the Alabama former senator and lawmaker, at the center of this story, it is logical that we talk about the history of imprisonment here in the United States. Imprisonment, the American incarceration system, was devised in order to continue slavery under another name, continued slavery under a regime of terror. And terror of Black folks extended, of course, not just to night riding and lynching folks, but to the institutional terror of prison, to make prisons as bad a place as possible, and a place that during some periods in U.S. history, you were lucky to emerge from alive, a place where you did not grow old because the conditions were so unhealthy and mitigated against continued life for you. So in the American penal history, especially its foundational Southern history, the idea of making prisons dangerous to your health is nothing strange at all.
Okay, so what does the Black Agenda report think is uh, the thing that the population need to do to kind of like offset this new, apparently attack on people's civil liberties and human rights?
Well, that's a very big question. What this editor of Black Agenda report thinks the population ought to do about the criminal justice system as a whole, overthrow it. Of course, we're not in the business here of recommending reforms. We're in the business of talking about radical solutions to the oppression of folk, of ways to throw off the yoke. So I'm not going to come up with a laundry list of reforms.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for joining me, and thanks for giving us that update. And we'll watch this and see how it play out.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining the Real News.